What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and in this video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different from my standard stuff. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, then you know that most of my videos just focus on, bringing a deck into a format that is pretty underexplored, playing it a bit and showing off some replays, doing my analysis of those replays, etc. But what I don't often show is how the decks actually come to being. Now, there are often a couple reasons for this. One could be that I'm doing a net deck of someone else's deck that I think is really cool, and I want to show it off on the channel. Another could be that I think it's relatively straightforward with how the deck is built and stuff, especially throughout the DM era. There are a lot of things where it's just you have a core of 20 to 30 cards, and the rest of the deck can just be kind of filled around that. And that's what determines your strategy. So in those cases, it's a little bit more straightforward to see what differentiates a given deck from another one. And oftentimes a lot more straightforward to build those sorts of decks. But we're entering a time period in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where the ban list is now around. So that means that there's less of a common core of cards that a lot of decks are doing. And there's more sort of individual expression that each deck has. And this can make building a deck very interesting. It can actually mean that there are a lot of different ways to go with a given deck, because even if you have a core of archetype cards, what you fill around that can vary from deck to deck depending on what direction you want to go with it. So I figured that I'd show off a bit of my process in making a deck for the channel here and making an iconic deck for Cyber format, which is Elemental Heroes. Now, Elemental Heroes is a fan favorite archetype. It's made up of these relatively weak Elemental Hero monsters, or at least relatively weak right now, monsters that then fuse into other monsters like Elemental Hero Thunder Giant and Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. And they're very iconic. They're used by the protagonist of the second series, Jade and Yuki. And at this point in the game's history, Cyber format, which is September 2005, using the GOAT format ban list and a card pool up to Cybernetic Revolution, they are pretty underpowered. And because they're so underpowered, there are a variety of different things you can do with them. For instance, you can try and lean into their field spell, Skyscraper, which allows them to gain 1,000 attack when they attack into an opponent's stronger monster. You can also lean into their fusion spell, Miracle Fusion, which allows you to banish them from graveyard to bring out one of the fusion monsters. There are a variety of things you can do with the Elemental Heroes, and I figured that because there are so many different ways to go with it, I figured I'd show my process for how I decide to make this version of the deck and how I try to make it as competitive as possible while still sticking to, playing the cards in the deck. Because when I bring a jank deck onto the channel, I always try and make sure that it's somewhat competitive. Some decks just, can't be made competitive for the life of them. They're just not good enough. The cards are not quite there. But I do think that a lot of decks can be sort of viewed in a more competitive sense and, sort of massaged into a deck that, while maybe not tier 1, can definitely win some games. So let's just go through my process here for Elemental Heroes. And I do have an idea for this deck that I've cooked up. And part of why I wanted to make this video is because I think the idea takes the deck in a very interesting way, and I wanted to sort of show how I arrived at that conclusion for the deck. I'm not sure if it's going to be a good idea or better than the other version of the deck that are out there, but I figured that, talking through it with y'all could sort of solidify my reasoning for it and also help me decide on certain cards and ratios in the deck. So when I dive into these jank stuff, first, if I'm doing an archetype, I see what the archetype has available to it. And as of Cybernetic Revolution, there's not much. As I mentioned, the normal monsters here are just here to fuse into things. Now, they are all warriors, which means that you can search them off of Reinforcing the Army, which is a very powerful card. But before we dive into the sort of generic support for these things, it's just good to focus on the cards themselves. And then we'll sort of fill in the deck, adding in the support cards for them. So one thing to note is that they are all warriors, so Reinforcing the Army should be on your mind. Another thing to note is that the 4 monsters here, from AVN to Sparkman, can all go into the fusion monsters, while Bubbleman, which is an effect monster, so that's kind of nice, this card cannot go into a fusion. So there is an argument to not include Bubbleman in the deck and just focus on the fusion materials. So that is also good to note. There are sort of 2 different paths you can go. You can go a path that focuses purely on the fusions, in which case you wouldn't play Bubbleman, or you could try and incorporate all the Elemental Heroes in and maybe play Bubbleman there. Next up is Rottweiler, which is another monster that's not an Elemental Hero, but does have support for the Elemental Heroes. So this can be a bit tricky because occasionally there are support cards that don't have the archetype name in them. So if you're searching for them on Dueling Book, it can be hard to pull up. Generally, things like Wikipedia and other online resources like that will list these sort of ancillary support cards on them, but it won't necessarily be as clear when they came out without actually checking the cards themselves. So it can be a bit tricky to find these, but one of the benefits of the way that I'm going through the Yu-Gi-Oh formats on the channel is that, I'm sort of going through each card when they're released And so for me personally, this card's been on my mind because it is an elemental hero support card here. I don't think it's very good. It says if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, target one elemental hero card and one polymerization in your graveyard, add them to your hand. So this is a way to get back resources if you are going for the more fusion heavy strategy. If you're going for polymerizations and stuff, you can potentially pair this with that and try and get some back. Although there's also a spell, Fusion Recovery, which is in Cybernetic Revolution, which basically does the same thing. Although in that case, it's not a monster, so it's not a body, I guess. But also, it might be a little bit worse than Rottweiler in the sense that with Rottweiler, you don't need to have Fusion Summoned with the Elemental Hero, but with the Fusion Recovery, you do actually have to have Fusion Summoned. So, those are things to think about. I don't think Rottweiler should see play in these decks. I think that, its effect is not quite good enough. Its body is not quite good enough because 800 attack is pretty weak, 1200 defense is pretty weak. Actually, the same stats as Bubble Man. That's kind of interesting. I never noticed that before. But it's just a little bit too slow as well. And especially in this format, which I'll get to in a second, because I think after you've gone through these sort of support cards for the archetype, it is very, very important to consider the format that you're playing in. But I'll get to that in a second. For now, we got some more support cards to go through. Skyscraper, as I mentioned, is an option. You can lean into this a bit more. It's a field spell. It says if an elemental hero monster attacks a monster that has a higher attack, the attack monster gains 1,000 during damage calculation only. And that can be very powerful, getting over a variety of things. In this format, Cyber Dragon played a lot, so this is a potential way to deal with that. So that is an option you can go for with this deck. Terraforming can also search this out. If you're playing Terraforming, you could also play Fusion Gate as well. If you want to lean into that, maybe play some Dim Fuses as well to bring back your elemental heroes, make more fusions. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And of course, Dim Fuse pairs very well with Miracle Fusion, which is another card that I mentioned here. It's a fusion spell that lets you fusion summon by banishing materials from grave. So that's very nice. It basically allows you to not use many resources that have not been used to go into a fusion monster, which is very, very powerful and very, very unique among fusion decks at this time. So for me personally, this card is the thing that stands out as to why you would play elemental heroes, what they do unique compared to other decks at the time, beyond just being an anime archetype. There are also two other spells here that are specific to one elemental hero. We've got Bubble Shuffle and we've got Spark Blaster. Both of these are pretty bad. I'm not really going to go through their entire effects because they've got long effects. But basically, they're very, very specific to the one elemental heroes here, and they don't really do much. Bubble Shuffle basically changes things to defense position, lets you bring in another elemental hero if you've got Bubble Man on field. Spark Blaster lets you change battle position as well, but you have to have Spark Man on field. Both of these are not really worth the effects for how specific they are, so I don't really think they're worth playing. Lastly, there is the Trap Hero Signal. This is when a monster you control is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, spell summon one level 4 or lower elemental hero monster from your hand or deck. This can allow you to get out another resource and potentially get another fusion material in grave for Miracle Fusion. So that's something to consider. It's pretty weak as, compared to other traps in the format, but maybe just getting out another fusion material is worth it for you. Now that we've gone through the cards themselves in the archetype, what I like to do is I like to think, okay, this is what the archetype has going for it. What does it have to compete against? And the main thing that you have to worry about in Cyber format is the existence of Cyberstein OTK decks. So Cyberstein OTK decks are decks that basically use Cyberstein to, bring out powerful fusion monsters like Cyber End Dragon, Cyber Twin Dragon, and just OTK you instantly. And so you generally need to have outs to those things in your deck, and that is what you have to be worried about. Some decks try and combat the Stein OTK strategy by just trying to deal as much damage as possible, as early as possible, trying to get them below the 3,000 life point range so that Stein can't activate and then some cards in your opponent's deck are dead. Some decks try and just use a bunch of back row that can interact well with Stein, things like Threatening Roar or Scapegoat potentially, or just general removal to prevent Stein from really being able to do much. So, these are ways that you can potentially counter Stein, and these are things that, if you're building the elemental hero deck, you should be thinking about okay, how am I countering Stein? Which direction am I going to go? Am I going to try and deal damage? Am I going to try to, load up on removal and things like that? What am I going to do there? Another thing to note, as I mentioned earlier, is Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon is a card that's played a lot in this format. 2100 attack, you can special summon out. It allows games to get a lot more aggressive. And, if you don't necessarily have a way to deal with this, then it can be a bit rough for you. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, Skyscraper could be a potential good option here to go into if you've got the Cyber Dragons out. Oh, and also I should mention, I sort of didn't talk about these, but I should mention the fusion monsters because this is what you're going into. These are sort of the end goals of your archetype. And one of them is Elemental Hero Flame Wingman. It's a 2100 attack point monster that, it must be fusion summoned, so you can't cheat it out with something like Cyberstein or Metamorphosis or something like that. And when this card destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the destroyed monster in the graveyard. So that can be pretty good. at just dealing a bunch of damage. And also, you know, if you pair it with something like Skyscraper, you can get over some pretty big monsters. The other Elemental Hero fusion we got is Elemental Hero Thunder Giant. This is a fusion monster that also must be fusion summoned, and once per turn you can discard one card, then target one monster on the field with original attack less than the attack of this card and destroy that target. So this can be more removal. 2400 attack is pretty decent. It ties with Monarchs, which are very popular in this format as well. That's good to know about. I put UFO Roid Fighter here as well, just so it's sort of like, you know, a fun little fusion option because, you know, this does have an Elemental Hero in the artwork, so you could potentially play it in an Elemental Hero deck as sort of like an interesting thing to go into, and with big attack if you use an Elemental Hero fusion monster plus UFO Roid, because this is just a fusion monster that basically its attack and defense is the combined attack and defense of the things used to summon it. So this is something you could do if you want to go like full anime on that. I don't really think it's worth playing in this deck though, because I do think the main way to play Elemental Heroes is with the Miracle Fusions. So now that we sort of covered the context of the format as well as what the Elemental Hero archetype has going for it, let's think about how we can best, you know, bring out the potential of the Elemental Hero archetype in the context of that format. Now, as I mentioned, I think the biggest thing that this deck has going for it is Miracle Fusion. What makes Miracle Fusion so strong is that you're able to use resources that have been spent already to bring out a boss monster. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to play Polymerization and potentially go like -2 to bring out a monster that your opponent can easily trade with, right? So I like this card, and I think that is the main thing to do in the archetype. Now, one of the ways you can take advantage of this is by playing Polymerization and things like that. So if you play Polymerization, you probably want to play King of the Swamps as well, and you're using Polymerization to send these to grave, and you're getting out a fusion monster from that, and then you're bringing out another fusion monster with the Miracle Fusion on top of it. That's something you can do. I think that's a valid way to play the deck. However, to me, that feels really underwhelming because, you know, I don't think that either of these fusion monsters is strong enough to just carry the game on its own. And I don't think bringing out another one will, like, change that, right? It's cool you get a bunch of damage on board, which, as I mentioned with the Cyberstein decks, like, you want to be getting in a ton of damage to get them below the 5,000 life point threshold. So that is nice. But I do feel like this is just very, very underwhelming. And it's not really taking full advantage of Miracle Fusion. But okay, if we're not fusing to get the fusion materials engraved, what are we doing with the materials to get them engraved for Miracle Fusion? Are we just summoning them out and, you know, trying to trade with our opponent's monsters? Like, what are we doing with these? And one of the ways that we could be using these is with Skyscraper, as mentioned before, because Skyscraper allows your fusion monsters, or fusion materials, that is, to attack over your opponent's monsters, but it doesn't protect them when those monsters attack back in. So one of the things you could do, you could play a Skyscraper focus deck. You could just bring out these monsters, attack in, accept that they are going to die on the crackback, but then use that to fuel your Miracle Fusions. I think that's also kind of underwhelming. I think it's also a little bit slow. So I don't really like that version of the deck as much. Also, you know, if your opponent just plays Dust Tornado or MST and they target the Skyscraper, like during your battle phase, then you don't get the bonus after you declare the attack, and then you just lose your monster that turn. Your opponent just gets aggressive on the next turn, hitting in for a ton of damage. So I think that play is a little bit too fragile. So then how am I proposing to best use Miracle Fusion? How am I proposing to best use these fusion materials? Well, my idea for this is, what if we played discard traps like Raigeki Break? We could also play Phoenix Wind Blast. Like, one of the other tools that you can use on DB is the release date sorter, which is very important. You can also use this limitless thing down here. I said April 2005, which is the ban list that Cyber format uses. Now, as a note, if you want to do this specifically for Cyber format, you can't actually click on the GOAT format option here, because that will actually tell you that, like, Cyber Dragon's illegal. See, all the cards from Cybernetic Revolution are counted as illegal if you pick the GOAT format version there. So you do just have to go down to the April 2005 version there. That doesn't come up with most formats that we cover, it just comes up with Cyber specifically because it's so tied to GOAT. But what if we use these discard traps? Or just other discard outlets, potentially like Tribe Infecting Virus or something, right? So if we're going into Tribe Infecting Virus, there it is. That also gives us discard outlets. We can pop our opponent's entire field, go for a Miracle Fusion, and do things with that. So that's pretty nice. If we're playing Tribe and the discard traps, we could also play Sinister Serpent. So that seems to be good. We could also play Abyss Soldier as well. And that seems pretty decent as well, you know, if it pairs with our serpents and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Abyss Soldier doesn't pair with the heroes, so I'm not sure if I'm going to actually include this in the final cut. This is just sort of spitballing things to do with these discard traps. Also, I'm going to just I'm going to add the full 3 of for these because I do think that they're good enough to play at 3 copies each. So let's put them in here at the full 3. And as a note, you know, Abyss Soldier needs water, so it's kind of awkward with your other heroes here. Can't get them engraved. But Bubbleman is a water. So if we're playing Abyss Soldier, do we play Bubbleman? That's the question. And if we're playing all these discard traps, this gets me thinking, okay, well, we might be pretty low resources at a lot of points in this game. And if we're really low resources and like Bubbleman is our only card, then we can easily special summon this out and get the draw 2 effect. That seems pretty good to me. So I'm actually now thinking, okay, well, Bubbleman doesn't fuse into anything, but pairs with Abyss Soldier. It gets you a draw potentially. It can be a free special summon potentially. So I'm actually thinking about trying to include this. So I think that that could be a pretty good option as well. And now we've sort of got the beginnings of an idea where we use the normal heroes as sort of discard fodder to both thin down our hand for things like Bubbleman, but also to set up graveyard fodder for Miracle Fusion to do late game bombs after we've removed our opponent's field with things like Phoenix Wind Windblast or Raigeki Break. And we've also got these other discard outlets that sort of does a little bit of water package. So if you're doing a little bit of water package, you could also have things like Spiritual Water Art Owie, right? I'm not sure if I'm necessarily going to include this, but it is an idea. So I'm putting this into the deck. Also, now that I've started getting into the deck proper, let's cut out some of the cards that we're definitely not including. We're not including Spark Blaster. We're not including Bubble Shuffle. I think that the Rottweiler should definitely go. The Skyscraper Dream is probably a little bit dead. Skyscraper conflicts with Bubbleman, so if we are leaning into the Bubbleman stuff, then I do want to just get rid of Skyscraper. I'm not quite sure on Hero Signal yet. I don't think that it's worth it, especially if we're playing this lineup of traps already. So I am going to cut it for now, but we could come back to that potentially later. So if I'm going more in on the Bubbleman stuff, I might want to play 3 copies of it. So let's just put in 3 copies right there. Also, we should be doing Rotas because that thins out our deck a bit. It also gets any hero monster we want to hand. So let's put in 2 of those right there. And now we got to think about, like, okay, what are the ratios we're playing our heroes and our fusion at? Now, if we're leaning into the elemental hero stuff, I want to play triple Miracle Fusion. And if I'm playing triple Miracle Fusion, then I probably want to be playing more than one of each of the heroes, right? Because otherwise, if I'm just playing one of each hero, that gives a maximum of 2 fusion monsters that we can bring out, and one of these Miracle Fusions will be dead. And I don't want that because that conflicts with Bubbleman. So, for now, I'm going to start upping the count of these. Actually, I'm just going to type hero. I feel like hero is easier. Yeah, I'm going to start upping the count of these hero monsters. I'm going to put in 1 each more, just to get them up to 2 each. So this gives us a bit more Miracle Fusion fodder. Now, instead of playing some of these hero monsters like Avian or maybe Clayman or something, or maybe Sparkman, because Clayman has defense, I guess, we could potentially play King of the Swamp as well. King of the Swamp will serve as a substitute for the Miracle Fusions, but I don't quite like that as much in the deck because we can't search it out off Rhoda. So I don't really want to go with the King of the Swamp route. It could be more deck thinning if we add polys to the deck as well, but then we're sort of doing something different. And as I mentioned, I don't really want to go into the poly into Miracle Fusion plays because I do think that's a bit underwhelming. King of the Swamp is also a water for Owie though, and it's also a water for Abyss Soldier. So it might be worth just playing King of the Swamp as a water monster just to have. I don't know about that. That's a bit of an interesting thing. I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna start putting those in. I'm just going to put in 3. We can subtract from that if we want. But this might be also a good option because of water for Abyss. So, okay, let's think beyond this as well. So, now that we've sort of gotten a bit of a core that we're doing for our archetype itself, let's think about the other good cards in this set, or in this format, that is. So, I do think that if we're playing with low resource stuff, then I think that triple Sidra could be pretty good. Because, you know, this gets more aggressive. We get monsters on field with it. And, you know, 2100 attack, nothing to scoff at there. And also, like, we want to be in a lot of low resource situations, right? Like, so that way our Bowman will go off. That way, you know, yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe the Cyber Dragon does conflict because if we sit on, like, an Abyss Soldier or a Fusion monster, then Cyber Dragon didn't do anything. But Cyber Dragon also helps us, like, after those monsters are cleared. I'm going to put this in the side for now. I think at the very least, it could be a good side deck card. So I'll consider it there. Whoops, vanished. But yeah, I'll consider it in the side deck for now. But something else we could consider is the limited list. So Something we can do is we can do limit 1 and just search like that. See any good cards we want to include. Pot of Greed, definitely an inclusion that we want in this deck. We could do card D, just to get heroes engraved because we're getting the empty advantage. I'm gonna think about that. I'm gonna put that in the deck there. Heavy is definitely something that should go in main or side. I'm just gonna put it there. Mirror Force as well should go in the deck. Sangan could go in the deck as well, getting a Serpent to hand, so I like Sangan there. Duo should go in the deck. MST seems pretty good in the deck. Snatch could be good. Yeah, I think Snatch is just very, very powerful. Morphing Jar is kind of interesting because we are going to be in low resource scenarios a lot. So you'd think the Morphing Jar would be something that we'd want to have, but at the same time, it shuts off our Bubble Men. So I'm actually not sure if we want Morphing Jar. I'm going to put it in the side just as a thinker. Call we probably want. Ceasefire in the side. Jinzo in the side as well. These are like 4 just side deck tech stuff. Use Ceasefire against flip focus strategies. Jinzo against trap focus strategies. So those can be good to consider. Premat is very good with Abyss Soldier. But it does have anti-synergy with our fusion monsters because they can't be brought out with Premat even if they've been properly summoned originally. So not sure if Premat will make the cut here. Honestly, maybe even Call won't make the cut, but I'm putting them in the main right now just to think about them. TT should probably go in the deck. That benefits us a lot if we're in low resource situations. Sinister Serpent, or not Sinister Serpent, Graceful Charity should go in. Exiled Force could go in because we are playing a warrior package, so this could be good just to have removal. So that's an option. I don't think this deck needs Lily. It does get in a ton of damage, but I don't think this deck really pairs well with it. Definitely not Behemoth. Reckless Greed, maybe, but like I feel like this deck does just want to be drawing each turn to try and draw into the Bubblemen, so I don't really like Reckless Greed. Ring should definitely go in the deck. I think Ring is very good. We got Tribe in. Breaker could go in as well. Warrior Lady probably as well because we are playing a warrior package here. We don't have Lights and Darks for BLS, so no real point to playing that. Yeah, the Sparkmen are light, but we don't really have any darks besides Sangan and Breaker, so I feel like the BLS is a bit worse here. So I'm not considering that right now. We don't really have anything for deck dev since our fusions are not dark. And yeah, Vortex and Nephthys. Well, Vortex probably goes in the side. I put it in the side there. But I don't really think Nephthys is worth it there. So now what have we got? We should also, beyond limited cards, a very good card to know about in this format is Dust Shoot. Dust Shoot is around at 3 copies. Dust Shoot should probably see play in this deck. If we're playing the 3 Dust Shoots in the main, maybe we don't need the Owie. It's a bit tricky. I don't know, it's tough. Like, let's see how many of each type we have. We have 22 monsters, 13 spells, 16 traps. I think we should probably cut down on the Owies or the Dust Shoots. I think of those, I'd rather cut down on... It's tough because we have a lot of water monsters, but I think Owie is just a bit cope in this deck in particular. Because if we're tributing like a Bubbleman with Owie, that's kind of awkward. I mean, the ideal situation is like we special summon that Bubbleman, draw 2, we draw into Owie, set the Owie, and then we've got a play, ripping a card out of their hand, making use of the Bubbleman on field. So maybe it is worth having the Bubbleman with the Owie. Maybe it's more worth than the Dust Shoots. Like, how many water monsters do we have? We have Serpent, Tribe. Well, how many water monsters do we have that we're fine just sacking to an Owie turn 1? We got Serpent, King of the Swamp, Bubbleman, and that's it. That's 7. And Bubbleman, you don't necessarily want to commit turn 1. Swamp, you also, it's kind of, I mean, it's very good if you're able to, like, just set Swamp, go for Owie, and rip a card out of hand, because you kind of want Swamp and Grave for the Miracle Fusions anyways. But I feel like with only, like, 4 monsters effectively that we want to like turn 1 tribute for Owie, I don't really feel like it's as good as Dust Shoot. So I'm going to keep the triple Dust Shoot in as opposed to the Owies. Maybe I'll put them inside. Maybe those will get cut from the side in the future. But yeah, I don't know. It's a bit awkward. You could definitely keep them in the deck and lean more heavily into that. So then I've cut down on the traps. I feel like the monster lineup could use a little bit of work here. Do we need 2 of each hero? Do we need 3 King of the Swamp? Is the question, or it's the main questions on my mind. Also, if we're playing the Rota package, do we want other generically good warriors like Blade Knight, etc.? I feel like we can't quite fit them into the deck, and it's not necessarily what we're doing with the deck here. We're mainly using Rota to get advantage to hand, to then pitch off our discard traps for things like the Miracle Fusions. So I feel like we Can't really afford to play Blade Knight or Zambira or things like that. So I'm not going to include them. But for the other monster lineups, like, do we really need all 8 of these heroes, especially when we do have King of the Swamps? That's a bit tricky. King of the Swamp can't be brought out from deck with a Rhoda, but it does give us flexibility. I feel like for the Rhoda, since we're playing King of the Swamp, we honestly probably don't need Avians. We can just use our Burstinatrixes to go into the Wingman. We could also probably cut one of the Clayman Sparkman pair. I think of these two, Sparkman might be a bit worse because Clayman at least has defense, whereas Sparkman is just like a weak attacker. So I'm okay with this. Playing Cardi, we could be playing Thundra. Thundra also works with our Wind Blast. Could be playing Night Assailants as well, but we don't play any flips, so I don't really want to do that. Thunder Dragon is an option, though. This is just very tricky, cutting the last 4 down. And if I add Thundra, that's just more like dead cards in hand. Like, our dead cards are planning on being like the heroes, right? So we don't want Thundras there. Yeah, we don't want to have 44 cards in a deck like this, because this deck is already bad enough in top deck mode. So we want to be drawing into things like Bubble Man as opposed to things like other dead cards in the deck. I think we do need the minimum of 4 of the fusion material heroes just to make our Miracle Fusions live. We could cut down on a Miracle Fusion, but I do say that I want to make these decks competitive, but also I want to retain their spirit as the jank that they are. And so I do, when I make these videos, I want to play like 3 of the Miracle Fusion, because that's the thing that we're building this deck around, right? So I do want to keep these. If you're actually optimizing a deck like this for tournament play, you probably would cut this down, maybe play only 2. I mean, if you're optimizing this further, you'd probably cut down on the fusion material heroes at all. But I kind of like having these as a late game play, just to go into these guys. They can potentially be really good, especially after Wind Blast and Raigeki Break and stuff like that. Bigger trap line was pretty good. Honestly, Call the Haunted and Premat are kind of what I'm thinking to cut right now. They don't pair with our big bombs, right? You want to use like Call or Premat for like our big guys here, and you can't bring them back with those, so I don't really think they're worth it there. So we just have 2 more to cut. We could cut 1. No, we can't cut 1 King of the Swamp because we need the King of the Swamps. We need all 3 to actually fuel our Miracle Fusions. So I don't want to cut any of the King of the Swamps. They also pair with Abyss Soldier as well. This is very tough for the last cut. Could cut Cardi. Cardi might be the move, but I really like drawing. I really like pitching the heroes with the Cardi, so I don't necessarily want to cut that. We could cut Heavy. Heavy could be dead in a variety of situations if we have a back row of a bunch of Chainable Traps. Heavy could also be really good, though. I'm gonna cut the Heavy for now. Have it in the side. This is tough. This is tough for the last one. It's always tough cutting down to the 40 card limit, especially when you have a pretty good set of cards here. What fusions are we going into? Do we need 4 of the fusion material heroes, or can we just have 3? I think we can probably just have 3. I feel like we're going into Thunder Giant more than a Wingman, because Thunder Giant has 2400 attack, Wingman only has 21. So I'm going to cut down on a Burstinatrix. I'm going to put 3 of these exactly. We got 3 Miracle Fusion exactly, 3 King of the Swamp exactly. It does tighten up our ability to be flexible with the fusions, but I think this is ultimately fine. We're going into Thunder Giant more. There is a risk if our opponent knocks our Clayman. That's awkward. So that's an argument for potentially playing Sparkman here instead. But again, we're mainly using these for discard fodder for our Raigeki Break and Phoenix Wind Blast and stuff like that. So I think it should be fine having the Clayman there. But now that we've sort of gone through the main deck, I'm pretty happy with this. So let's re-examine the side deck. I've sort of been putting a bunch of cards here in the side deck that have been cutting from the main, just to think about them further. But now I think it is time to dive into this side deck. First of all, Stein's out. That was just for an example. Also, in the extra deck, Roid's out. We're not playing that. For the side deck, though, I want to include some Noblemen of Crossouts. I think those are good. So we put in 2 of these. I think we don't need the 3rd or the 4th Burstinatrix, or not the 4th Burstinatrix, but the 2nd Burstinatrix. I don't think there's a matchup where we'd like tinker with our ratio here to try and make it like slightly more likely that we're going into Wingman as opposed to Thunder Giant. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to put in the second nobleman there. The owies could be good if we know we're going first. We could bring these in, just have like 6 hand rips as opposed to 3. I'm going to leave that in as an option. I think there is potentially something there. I'm going to take out the morphing jar. I feel like that's not really the best here. We probably want to put in like decrees or roars. I'm going to take out premat and call. I just don't think they fit in the deck as much. Decrees would be good against burn stuff. Roar would be good against Stein. I feel like of those, I'm a little bit more worried about like Stein decks. So I'm going to put in the roars. You could also put in Karibos instead of roars, but Karibo kind of conflicts. Well, I guess Karibo like gets cards out of hand for Bubble Man, so maybe that's better. Also, you know, if our opponent brings in a bunch of decrees against us, Karibo survives against that. So maybe Karibo is the right pick there, as opposed to the roars. Yeah, I'm gonna put in 3 Karibos instead of the roars. It's kind of awkward. Kind of awkward because we've only got the Sangen to search this out. And like roar stops the entire battle phase, Karibo just stops 1 attack. But I do feel like Karibo is fine here, especially if they do bring in decrees against us, because that is something they could do after seeing that we're on all the Regeki breaks on the Phoenix Wind Blasts. They could be like, well, okay, I got to bring in decrees to shut those down. So I am okay with bringing in the triple Karibos. Jinzo's a little bit awkward here, but I do think that Jinzo being a body is nice that we can bring in against our opponent's trap focus decks. So yeah, I'm going to keep the Jinzo here. Triple Sidra, you probably don't need 3. Going second, this can be good to bring in, though. So I am just going to keep in the side. I'm not sure what else I'd put there, but I think that's what I'm going to do for that. So yeah. And then the last thing we really have to do is fill our fusion deck here. So what I generally do for just filling out the fusion deck in a format like Cyber format where you've got an unlimited fusion deck, I just search up fusion monsters by release date, and then I put in any that are important to include. So that includes Thousand Eyed Restrict, Last Word from Another Planet, Dark Balter, Phoenix Skull Dragon, Ryu Senshi, Reaper on the Nightmare. Let's see what else. Master of Oz, probably. Ojama King, Darkblade the Dragon Knight, Gatling Dragon, King Dragoon. I'm going to put in a second Thunder Giant there, because we're going to 2 of these and 1 of the Wingman. And then also, I should fit in Cyber Twin and Cyber End. I guess I'll cut out the King, because that won't really come up as much. But an important thing to note is that in Cyber format, you have an unlimited fusion deck. So you can just proxy in whatever card you might not have here. The reason why I do like to put in as many fusion monsters as possible, even though I'm not really likely to go into them, is because it also helps if I'm trying to think about what my opponent is going to do. It can help to just look at the fusion deck and be like, okay, what options are available to them? What do I need to play around? So I think that this should be a good fusion deck here. Just, you know, a variety of cards that you can look at. And you've also got the 2 Thunder Dragons and the Flame Wingmen, which you are likely to go into. So that is my version of Heroes. And we haven't done the most important part about refining this deck further, which is getting some test games. I will be showing off some games with this deck in my next video. But I wanted to focus this video completely on deck building and sort of my process for this. I'm not the best deck builder in the world. I know that. But I do think that in trying to build a lot of the decks for these formats, I've sort of gotten a little bit of a knack for trying to coax out some competitive versions of some jank decks. Or maybe if I don't have quite a knack, I've got a unique take on things. And hopefully that unique take can help you when you're trying to build for jank strategies in whatever format you're looking to. And hopefully this process can apply across a variety of different formats, because this is generally what I do for building these sorts of decks. So I hope you enjoy getting a peek into my process here. Let me know if you want to see more of these deck building sort of videos in the future. I can definitely make more of them. You know, again, I don't think I'm the best deck builder, but if people do enjoy this sort of thing, then I will definitely make more. Also, subscribe to the channel if you want to be notified when the next video comes out, which will feature games with this deck, because I am planning on jumping in to some games with this, seeing how it does, seeing if my theory behind it is correct, or if I was just completely on the wrong track and this deck is actually hot garbage, which it very well might be. But if you want to support me directly as well, I have a Patreon, link in the description down below. And if you join the Patreon and get a shout out in these videos, so big shout outs to Tyler Compton, GM Fest, Dump Truck, Rincewind, Pork Chop, and Burn Donker. It really means a lot that you all support me this way and motivates me to make more videos like this. Also, if you want to play any games in the formats that are featured on the channel, definitely head on over to the YGF from Zero Discord server, link in the description down below. It's a great place to find games in Cyber format and any other format that I've covered on the channel. We also hold monthly tournaments and weekly locals there if you want to play in a more competitive setting. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed. As always, I will be featuring this deck in my next video as well, getting some games with it. So hopefully those will be pretty fun. And yeah, hopefully we can actually get some wins with this deck. I haven't played them yet, so it will be cool to see how we actually do. But I hope that you enjoyed this video as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from Wide from Zero, and I'm signing off.